Shalom, I'm Ryan White of Rooted in Torah Ministries. This week we are starting off the brand new Torah cycle with Genesis 1 verse 1 through 6 verse 8. The Torah portion is of course called Bereshit, and this is an action-packed Torah portion. There's a lot to cover here, and honestly we're not going to have enough time, so we're really going to kind of focus in on some specifics here. Let's begin right away by blessing our Creator who's blessed us with this week's Torah portion. Baruch et Adonai Hamvarak, Baruch Adonai Hamvarak leolam va'ed, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, ve'natan lanu et Torato, Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'Torah. Amen and amen. So this week we are starting off with the creation story. Genesis 1 has the creation of the earth. And what I really want to focus in on this week is looking at this through the eyes of the culture who would have received it. You see, when they're coming out of Egypt, Moses is writing this, and so in order to really fully grasp the absolute gravity of what's going on here in this creation story, we have to put ourselves back into the mindset of the people originally receiving this and understand that they already had been told creation stories. Egypt had their own creation story. Remember that Abraham comes out of Mesopotamia, and in Mesopotamia, in Babylon, they had their own creation stories. And so really, if we want to really grasp the full aspect of what Genesis 1 is teaching us about the creation of the world, we really have to put this in light of other ancient Near Eastern creation stories. So in order to do that, I've got some books here I'm going to share with you really quickly that are really good resources. This one is Ancient Near Eastern Texts by James Pritchard. There's 2 volumes here, and these are basically all sorts of documents that come out of the ancient Near Eastern world. There's creation stories, there's law codes, all sorts of things. These are a great reference tool. This is an excellent one for just really quick sources. Old Testament Parallels, Laws and Stories from the Ancient Near East by Victor Matthews and Don Benjamin. And this one kind of shows you, as you go through the Torah, it shows you different like the creation stories and flood stories and stuff like this that parallel the Bible. We've got Creation in the Old Testament, which is edited by Bernard Anderson. Really good articles, especially one called Creation, Righteousness, and Salvation that we're going to be looking at a few quotes from. And finally, and by no means this is not all, there's lots of books that are really excellent on these, but these are the ones I picked out of my library that really stand out in my mind. This is the very first book I actually read on ancient Near Eastern culture and context, and it's called Ancient Near Eastern Thought and the Old Testament by John Walton. I would highly recommend this book to you. On my website, rootedintorah.com, we are going to be working on a course that will be going through this book in the upcoming year, hopefully, God willing, with time and such. So those are some excellent resources. And I just wanted to start off by, kind of giving you a little bit of idea if you're interested in looking into this yourself and verifying some of this stuff and digging in, if that's your calling, is to dig into this stuff. So let's begin with Genesis 1, verse 1 and 2. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving over the face of the waters. So in creation myths, creation stories in the ancient Near Eastern world, and I use the word myth in the sense, we realize that our Bible has the only true creation story. But a myth is more than just a story. A myth is something that is told over and over and over again by a community in order to establish their identity. This is why we go through the Torah cycle on an annual basis. By reading over it again and again and again, it creates within ourselves a sense of identity. I would also propose to you, as believers in Yeshua, we should be doing the same thing for the 4 Gospels in the book of Acts. That's something that I'm going to be a project I'm working on my website this coming up year as well. And realize that in these other countries, they would tell creation stories, and it's not just because they were concerned with the material origins of the universe, They were actually more concerned with how does the world function and what does this mean in my life today? And that's ultimately what Genesis 1 is about, is how the world functions. A lot of times we use it to Genesis 1 to combat the theory of evolution. And the thing is, though, is that nobody believed in evolution in the time when the Bible was written. Nobody. The theory of evolution is thousands of years after the book of Genesis is written. And so Genesis is not aimed at disproving evolution. Now, I'm not saying you can't disprove evolution. I am not a believer in the concept of macroevolution. But at the same time, I think that we need to look for other things. And the reason is because we kind of discredit or not discredit, but we minimize the true impact, should I say, of the text of Genesis 1 when we only look at it as a way of combating the theory of evolution. You see, for the ancient person, how the material universe came into being wasn't that important. For them, what's important is what? When am I going to eat next? Am I going to be able to plant crops? And protection, things like this. It's like this: when you walk into a job and you're there for the interview, how many of you have ever gone and during your interview you said, you know what? Did they use drywall screws or nails to hold up the drywall in this building? Did you use a latex primer? Did you use a primer? How many of you ever asked that? Are the studs 2x4s or 2x6s in my office? You don't really care. What are you concerned about when you go in for a job interview? What's the function that I'm going to be performing? Who's in charge of this company? Is this company actually going to continue to exist? Is it going to continue to be able to provide me a paycheck? Right? What are my duties? What are my responsibilities? Those are the important things. And I'm going to propose to you, for ancient people, it was no different. When they are coming out of Egypt, they want to know the important things. Who's in control? And the creation story is focused on that. Who is in control? You see that the creation story is set up with what? 6 different days of creation. On day 1 through 3, you have the creation of what? Of light and darkness. You have the creation of you have the creation of the waters above and the waters below, and then you have the creation of the separation of water and land. By the way, separating out things was an act of creation. That's why when Israel is separated out from the nations, from Egypt, they are said to be created, right? So you have the functions, the function of light and darkness, the function of weather. So light and darkness is the function of time, right? When light and darkness cycles, that's a day, that's time. So waters above, waters below, what is that? That's weather. And then the separation of waters and land, that is your basis for what? For being able to grow crops. You can't grow crops underwater, right? So you have time, you have weather, and you have agriculture, essentially. And so you have those 3 functions. And then on days 4, 5, and 6, you have the things which are functioning to rule over those. All right? The sun and the moon rule over the day, the light, and the darkness. You have on day 5, matches up with day 2. That's where the birds and the fish rule over the skies and the seas. And then on day 6, that matches up with day 3. You have the land animals which rule over the land, essentially. And then, of course, you have the pinnacle of creation, which is mankind, and then, of course, the Shabbat. And let's not forget that the Shabbat was made for man, not man for the Shabbat, right? That's what our Master Yeshua taught us. So man is the pinnacle of God's creation. And man is created, as we see in Genesis 1, verse 26 through 28. Man is not just made, to be on the earth. Let's look at what it says here. Then God said, let us make man in our image. The word there is selem. Selem in the Hebrew. The Septuagint uses the word icon. icon. And that word, tselem, is elsewhere used to be, or is used for the word idol. Let us make man in our idol, in our image, in our icon. You're saying, whoa, wait a minute. Idols? Well, here's the thing. An idol is a representative of its God, right? Of the God it represents. What are we supposed to be? Aren't we supposed to be representatives of our God? Yes, absolutely. So man was created to be the image of God. We were created to be his representative on the earth. And that's the problem with idols. Idols are false representatives, the idols of other gods. The only idol that should ever exist is man himself imaging God. That is our job. That's our vocation, is to image God, to represent him and to learn from him and reflect his good rulership into nature. Let's continue reading here. Create man in our image according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and the cattle of the earth and all every creeping thing. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female. He created them, and God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea and the birds over the sky and every living thing that moves on the earth. We were created to rule. That is, and notice, he didn't say man rules and woman does it. No, male and female are supposed to subdue the earth and rule over the earth. Now this becomes very important because in other ancient Near Eastern creation stories, that is not the case. This is the book Old Testament Parallels by Matthews and Benjamin. And I want to read a little bit out of this. This is the Enuma Elish story, which is one of the most popular stories. This comes out of Babylon from the time of Hammurabi. You may have heard of him. He was one of the most famous kings in the ancient Near Eastern world. And so this Enuma Elish story, and I'm not going to read for you the whole thing because it would take a little while here, but it begins with, when on high no heaven had been named, no earth had been called, no Anunnaki, there was nothing. Old Father Apsu and Muma Tiamat, the mother of all living things, the two waters became one, and so on and so forth. And so there's this creation. So basically you have this Father God, and he creates all these lesser gods, and these lesser gods start to fight. And this is how the material creation of the world comes about. And this is a common motif in almost every single ancient Near Eastern creation epic, creation story, is that the world comes into being from battle. There's chaos, and out of the chaos is a fight, is violence, and out of the chaos comes the order of creation. Now that's interesting because we see right here in Genesis 1 verse 2, what's God doing? Is he battling anyone? No, there's no battle at all. There's no one who could actually pose a threat to our God. There's no fighting. And there's not chaos necessarily. In fact, it says the earth was formless. The word is tohu and void, bohu. It means it's in a state of non-order. It's not in chaos. There's not fighting going on. There's not opposition, but things are not put into their proper order, right? And so God, and if you actually look at the creation, God doesn't actually do much actual creation as we would think of, saying something and poof, it appears. God does what? He says he speaks. Rather than fighting, he speaks. Now notice Yeshua. Yeshua, rather than fighting the forces of Rome with a sword, he fights them with the word of his mouth. He fights them by teaching people how to be better human beings, by teaching them not to be afraid of Rome, not to be afraid of death, by teaching them that our God is more powerful than Caesar, and our God can bring you back from death even if Caesar kills you. So the word from his mouth is what creates. And then after that, what does he do? He separates waters. He separates water from land. And then he forms things, right? He's taking what exists and giving, he has raw material, and now he's giving that raw material function and purpose. And that's what creation is giving something a function and a purpose. That's why Israel can be multiple times throughout the Psalms and the prophets. God says, I made you, I created you. In fact, just last week in the Torah portion, if you remember the Torah portion from Deuteronomy 33, or sorry, it was 2 weeks ago, the Torah portion from Deuteronomy 32, God says, I made you, right? I made you. Well, you're sitting there thinking, well, no, their parents gave birth to them. No, no, no. God separated them out, and God gave them function and purpose. Now that just reminds me here, that ties in with Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10. Let's check this out. Okay? Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10. Turn there with me. For we are his workmanship, speaking of God the Father, created in Messiah Yeshua for good works, which God prepared beforehand so that we could walk in them. See, that's what salvation is. Salvation isn't, oh, you've been put on the good side, so now you're on the train to going to heaven or being resurrected. No, salvation is being freed from sin and death so that you can now go back to doing what God has designed you to do and being taken out of the chaos of the sin of your life and being put into the kingdom of his Son, of Yeshua, is new creation. You're being recreated. I have a whole series on this on the website, rootedintorah.com. It's called New Creation. And there's also a course on it called Restoring Creation that is just kind of a longer version of this. And we go way in depth and show you this language of creation is so important because in Yeshua, we are separated out from where we were and we are given function and purpose and role. And that is to do good works. We're not supposed to be just sitting around waiting for the rapture. We're supposed to be out having a positive change in the world, just like Israel was created to do. They were created to battle the chaos in the right, proper order, through keeping the Torah, through showing people there's a better way to live, a better way to function, by being the image of God rather than the image of the idols of all the surrounding nations. So we see that God does not battle chaos, that he just, there's non-order, there's just stuff there and he forms it. There's no one to battle. So that's one key element here. Now another key element is this, is that once the human creation comes around in this again, this is the Enuma Elish story from the ancient Near Eastern world. This is what they were teaching people in Babylon and even in Egypt. The Enuma Elish story is found in Egypt, or was brought down to Egypt as well. They said, this is the Marduk and Ea. Ea is one of the other gods. They are discussing the creation of humans. And they say, I will knead blood and bone into a savage. Aborigine. Aborigine is, we think of Aborigines as in Australia, but the word Aborigine means a primeval man, a primordial man, the first man. The primordial man will be its name. The Aborigines will do the gods' work. The savages will set the gods free. Now, what is that talking about, set the gods free? We turn to the Atrahasis story, which kind of has a similar thing. It says, the midwife the Lula, deliver Aborigines to labor for the gods. Let them bear the yoke. Let them work for Enlil. Enlil was another god. Let them labor for the gods. So in these other stories, the idea was that the gods created humans so that they wouldn't have to work anymore. See, they believed that the gods had to eat food and stuff like that. And so the gods were sick and tired of doing all the work themselves, so they create humans as cheap slave labor. All humans were cattle to them. We'll actually see that next week, just their mindset when we get to the flood stories. They believed that human beings were just nothing. They were just free, easy slave labor. The only people who were, and let's just go ahead and let's put this up here on the screen. This is from the book, and I didn't show it to you at the beginning. This is from the book Subversive Christianity, Imaging God in Dangerous Times by Walsh. He writes, Marduk created human beings as cheap slave labor to do the dirty work of the lower gods. And if you read the whole story, you can see this thing, but he's just kind of summarizing this. Only certain people, the king, princes, priests, and lords and ladies of the high courts, were ordained to be the images of the gods on earth. Where these image bearers could not be, idols were erected, and the idol would image the god to the people. So, what is he saying here? He's saying that only the upper class, only the king and the princes and the lords and ladies of the court, they would go around and everyone would think they were the image of God. They were the image of the gods of Egypt, of the gods of Babylon, and so on and so forth. But all the other people were just cheap slave labor. And so through this religious mindset, they controlled the people because I'm the image of the God, and you are just created, that's your lot in life. You can't ever rise up. There's no sense of basic human value, basic human worth in these other nations. And when we understand that this is how they believed creation worked, the Bible is explosive. It's empowering to the people. The Bible's saying, no! This is absurd. You were not created to be a slave laborer. You were not created to just work all day and give your food to the kings and the royalty so that because they're the image of the God, they're the one representing. You see, these religious things were used to control the people. And the book of Genesis, the opening chapter here, is absolutely liberating. It's countercultural. It's subverting the mindset that certain people were created in the image of God and everyone else is just worthless. It's destroying the caste system where if you were born into slavery, then that's your lot in life. And if you're born into royalty, then everyone serves you. No, our God does not take that. Our God did not create us. He said, let us make mankind in our image. This is the amazing thing that people are hearing when they read this. Everyone is made in the image of God. Everyone is charged with ruling over the earth. Everyone, not just the royalty. And as we go through the book of Genesis and Exodus, we're going to see time and time again the commandments that give equality to people. One law, both for the native born and for the stranger. You're to be a kingdom of priests. There's equality within God's kingdom. No one is born into a better role than the other person. And this is the story that Genesis is telling us when we understand the language and the culture. We are created to be God's idol, his image, his representative. It's only when we go and we serve other gods that we become idolaters. See, to be God's image is to bear his representation, his likeness. Not that we can do everything like him, but we bear his wisdom. We rule through his wisdom. And this is where Israel went astray. This is where Yeshua came to correct the problem. You see, because Israel thought that rulership meant defeating your enemies, crushing them. You look at, we all celebrate and we're happy about the Maccabees. And the Maccabees were great. I mean, there was a need for them to rise up, but the problem was that their sons, the Hasmonean kings, what did they do? They started taking back the kingdoms, the surrounding area. They actually expanded the nation of Israel to rival the size of it as it was in Solomon's day. But they were doing it through force, through violence. They were forcibly converting other nations. They were spreading the kingdom of God just like every other dictator had ever done in history. That's not how our God works. That's what Yeshua taught his disciples. He said, to summarize what he says here, he says, you see the Gentile nations, how their rulers lord it over them, and their great ones exercise immense power. If you do anything against them, they crush that rebellion. That's not how it's going to be with us. If you want to be great in my kingdom, become a servant. Become a servant. That's how you rule. Where does Yeshua get that from? He gets that from Genesis. God created mankind to rule the earth. And you say, well, okay, we can rule it however we want, right? No, not at all. Let's turn to Genesis 2, verse 15. This becomes very important here. Then the Lord God took the man and put him in the garden. And in our English versions here, it says to cultivate it and to keep it, which is what you do to a garden. But it really misses the true point of the text. God put him there to rule the garden. How? Let's look at the actual Hebrew word here. And if you see this over on the side of the screen, if you know a little bit of Hebrew, right here, the word is ebed. Ebed. That means servant, to serve. And the other word, so that cultivate actually means to serve. And the other word is shamar, which means to guard. The way that man was to rule the garden was not to go around and crush resistance to him. It was to serve. That's how you rule, is you serve. That's how Yeshua came. Yeshua did not come to be served, but to serve. He's the king because he served. And to guard. He guards when we are kings on this earth, when we are ruling, and by the way, every righteous king is known to do this. That's the duty of a king, is to guard, to protect the innocent people, to protect the people who can't protect themselves, who are being taken advantage of by the corporations, by the wealthy elite, by the foreign oppressors, to guard and to serve. That is the difference between the ancient Near Eastern world, where people were just cattle. They were just menial slave labor to make the gods' lives easy, where God is saying, no, you were created in my image. All of you are designed to rule, but you rule righteously through serving and through guarding, through protecting. Amen? I pray that you've got a blessing out of this. Let's bless our Creator who has blessed us with this week's Torah portion. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torat emet v'chei olam nata betukenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten ha-Torah. Amen and amen. I pray that Yah blesses you and keep you. We will see you again next week for the Torah portion. Noah. Shalom, everyone.